It was supposed to be the happiest afternoon of the month. I had been planning it for weeks, quietly, the way I always did everything for my daughter, in the background, without fanfare, without asking for anything in return. I had taken 2 buses to get to the French pastry shop on the other side of the city, the one she had mentioned exactly once, in passing, 3 months before. I wrote it down on a little piece of paper I kept in my coin purse. That was the kind of mother I was. The kind who listened. The kind who remembered. The kind who would travel 40 minutes on public transport at 72 years old, carrying a boxed cake in both hands, just to see a smile. But before I tell you what happened when my daughter opened that door, I want to ask you something. If you are watching this video, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where in the world you are watching from. We want to know how far these stories travel. Because this story traveled very far. And it changed everything. Her name was Vivian. My daughter. 41 years old, beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful, polished, maintained, deliberate. She lived in a 4-story house in the most coveted residential enclave of a coastal city in the south of the country, a house with a private garden, a heated pool, a wine cellar, and a panoramic terrace that looked out over the harbor. A house that cost $2,100,000, most of which came from me. I had spent 41 years being her mother. I had spent those same 41 years being, without fully understanding it, her financial foundation, her emotional safety net, her unconditional rescuer. My name is Margaret. Margaret Calloway. And I was, until the afternoon of my daughter's birthday, a woman who believed that love meant giving everything and asking for nothing. I remember precisely what I was wearing that Saturday afternoon. A navy blue blouse I had bought at a small shop near my apartment, ironed the night before and paired with cream-colored trousers I reserved for special occasions. I had even worn my good pearl earrings, the ones my late husband Raymond had given me for our 25th wedding anniversary. I wanted to look presentable. I wanted Vivian to be proud when she opened the door. I wanted her to look at me and think, even just for a second, that her mother was someone worth being happy to see. The taxi dropped me off in front of the wrought iron gate at exactly 2:30 in the afternoon. I pressed the intercom with one finger, balancing the cake box against my forearm and holding a small wrapped package under my other arm. Inside that package was something I had thought about for months. A sapphire bracelet that had belonged to my mother, Eleanor. Something old, something precious, something meant to travel from one generation of women to the next. I had polished it myself the night before, sitting at my kitchen table under the lamplight, with a soft cloth and a quiet heart full of hope. The gate clicked open without a word from the speaker. I walked up the stone path through the garden, past the rose bushes I had paid to have planted 2 summers ago, past the outdoor furniture set I had contributed to purchasing when Vivian said she wanted a proper entertaining space for her friends. I knocked on the front door and waited, still smiling, still hoping. When Vivian opened the door, the smile on her face was not there. She was looking down at her phone. She didn't look up immediately. When she did, her expression shifted from mild irritation to something that could only be described as inconvenience. The way a person looks when an alarm goes off that they forgot to disable. Not anger, exactly. More like the quiet resentment of being interrupted by something they never truly valued. "Oh," she said. "It's you." Just like that. No hug. No smile. No birthday warmth. 2 words that landed on me like cold water on a winter morning. "Happy birthday, my sweetheart," I said anyway, keeping the brightness in my voice the way a candle keeps its flame even when the wind picks up. "I brought your favorite. The almond cream cake from Delacroix's. And I have a little something for you." She opened the door wider without looking at me again, already walking back toward the kitchen, phone still in hand. "Just put it on the island," she said over her shoulder. "I'm in the middle of something." I walked through the entrance hall, marble floors I had helped choose, a chandelier I had contributed to, photographs on the wall that included not a single one of me, and set the cake box carefully on the kitchen island. The house smelled of expensive candles. From somewhere upstairs, I could hear the television playing cartoons. My granddaughter, Cora, 7 years old, was somewhere in that house and had not come running to greet me. That, too, was something I noticed. When I was useful, when I arrived with gifts and pocket money and the willingness to babysit at a moment's notice, Cora always ran to the door. She would throw both arms around my waist and say, "Grandma Margaret, I have so much to tell you," as if the days since we had last seen each other had accumulated a long and urgent list of important things. But today, perhaps she had been told to stay upstairs. Perhaps she had simply learned, the way children learn everything, from watching her mother. I stood alone in that kitchen for 11 minutes. I counted. I had a habit of counting things. I had been a bookkeeper for 33 years at a mid-sized shipping company, starting as a junior accounts clerk at 22 and retiring as senior financial controller at 55. Numbers were the language in which I understood the world, and that afternoon, standing in my daughter's kitchen with my good pearl earrings and my ironed blouse and my untouched birthday cake, I counted every one of those 11 minutes in silence. When Vivian finally walked in, she had changed into a cashmere lounge set. She poured herself a glass of sparkling water from the refrigerator, the same refrigerator I had bought them as a housewarming gift for $2,300, and leaned against the counter the way people lean when they are not planning to stay long in a conversation. "So," she said. "Did you want something?" I looked at her carefully. 41 years I had known this face. I had watched it take its first breath, had kissed it 10,000 times, had kept it in my palms when she was sick with fever and when she was heartbroken and when she graduated and when she married and when she cried. And still it surprised me, sometimes, how unfamiliar it could look. "I thought we might spend a little time together," I said. "It's your birthday. We haven't seen each other since Christmas." Christmas had been 4 months ago. 4 months in which she had called me exactly 7 times, always for a specific reason, to ask if I could watch Cora, to ask if I could transfer money for an emergency, to ask if I still had the number of the plumber I had recommended 2 years earlier. Not once to simply talk. Not once to ask how I was sleeping, or whether the pain in my hip had improved, or whether I had managed to make any friends since I had moved to the smaller apartment across town. "Marcus and I have a dinner reservation at 8, she said, meaning her husband. Marcus Holloway, her second husband, a man who dressed well and spoke with authority and had, as far as I could tell, never held a stable job in the 4 years they had been together. Marcus was always between ventures. Marcus was always on the verge of something big. And Marcus always, without fail, needed my help in the meantime. "Of course," I said. "Maybe just an hour then. We could have a slice of cake together. You and me and Cora." Vivian set her glass down and crossed her arms. "Mom," she said. "I need to say something to you, and I need you to hear it properly." I felt the shift in the room the way you feel a weather change before it arrives. That particular drop in pressure, that stillness in the air. I sat down on one of the kitchen stools without being asked. "I've been feeling very overwhelmed lately," she began. "With the house, with Cora's school, with Marcus's business concerns, with everything. And I've realized that a big part of what makes me feel overwhelmed is, you." I did not speak. I waited. "You show up without warning. You call too much. You give me that look every time I see you, that wounded, expectant look, like you're waiting for me to perform gratitude for you. And honestly, Mom, it's exhausting. You're exhausting." I felt my hands go still in my lap. "You've always been like this," she continued. "Always hovering. Always needing to be needed. Always making everything about your feelings and your sacrifices. I'm 41 years old. I don't need a mother anymore. I need space. I need to live my life without feeling guilty every time I don't call you back within the hour." "Vivian," I said softly. "I am your mother. I love you. That's all I've ever." "That's exactly it." Her voice sharpened. "You love me like a weight around my neck. You love me like a debt you're collecting on. And I'm done feeling obligated to pay it." The room went very quiet. Do you know what I actually want for my birthday this year? She said, and something in her tone changed. Became deliberate. Became cold in a way that was not anger but something older and more calculated. I want you to stop existing in my life. I want to wake up and not have to think about you. I want to stop feeling like I have a responsibility to manage your emotions on top of everything else I already manage. If I'm being completely honest with you, Mom, and I think I owe you that much, the best gift you could give me is to simply not be here anymore. To be gone. To disappear. I sat very still for a very long time. To disappear, I repeated. Yes, she said, without flinching, without softening. Gone. Out of my life. Permanently, if possible. I stood up from the stool. My legs were steadier than I expected. I picked up the small wrapped package from the counter where I had set it, the one containing my mother's sapphire bracelet, 3 generations of women, and I put it back in my handbag. I looked at the birthday cake in its white box, the cake I had carried across the city on 2 buses, and I left it on the counter. Perhaps Cora would enjoy it. Perhaps it would be thrown away. Either way, it was no longer a gift. It was just a cake. I hear you, I said. And I walked out. What Vivian did not know, as she watched me move down the stone path and through the wrought iron gate and into the waiting taxi, was that something had shifted inside me in that kitchen. Not broken. Shifted. Like a tectonic plate that has been under pressure for decades, that finally, quietly, moves. And when it moves, everything on the surface changes. The taxi drove me home through the late afternoon light. I looked out the window at the city I had lived in for 50 years. The streets where I had walked with Raymond when we were young. The hospital where Vivian was born. The school where she had learned to read, where I had stood at every parents' evening, every recital, every graduation ceremony, always in the front row, always with a camera, always with my whole heart stretched out like a tablecloth for her to set her life upon. I had moved into my current apartment 3 years ago, after selling the family home that Raymond and I had shared for 22 years. I had sold it primarily because Vivian had mentioned, in passing, that the neighborhood was going up in value and that if I ever thought about selling, the timing was good. She had not told me to sell. But she had benefited from the proceeds. $80,000 of it had gone toward the down payment on the wine cellar renovation Marcus had insisted upon. My apartment was small. A 1-bedroom with a kitchenette and a balcony just wide enough for 2 chairs. I had made it comfortable, my books, Raymond's old armchair, photographs of people I loved. But sitting in it that evening, alone with the echo of my daughter's voice, it felt smaller than usual. Smaller and quieter and emptier. I did not cry. I was surprised by that. I had expected to cry. Instead, I made a pot of tea, sat down at the small table by the window, and opened the drawer where I kept important papers. Old habit. A bookkeeper's reflex. When something happens that you cannot make emotional sense of, you make financial sense of it instead. You find the numbers. You lay them out in order. You let the math tell you what the feelings cannot yet articulate. I spent that entire night doing exactly that. I found receipts, bank transfers, contracts, and handwritten notes going back to when Vivian was 19 years old and I first co-signed a student loan for her because her grades at the time weren't sufficient for the full scholarship she had applied for. I had never thought of these papers as evidence of anything. I had thought of them as love, made legible. Looking at them now, laid out across the table in chronological order, they told a different story. The student loan had been $44,000, co-signed in full, with an agreement between us that she would repay me once she graduated and found work. She had found work. The repayment never came. When I gently raised it, 2 years after her graduation, she had said, "Mom, I'm barely getting started. You'd really ask me for money right now?" And I had said no. Of course I had said no. What kind of mother would I have been? When she was 26 and wanted to open her first small business, a boutique clothing shop, I had provided the full startup investment of $180,000, drawn from the inheritance my own parents had left me. The boutique had lasted 2.5 years before closing due to, according to Vivian, impossible market conditions and a lease that was highway robbery. She had never spoken of repayment. I had never asked. When she married her first husband, a pleasant enough man named Graham who turned out to have a gambling problem, I had paid for the wedding. Every detail, from the venue to the flowers to the honeymoon in the Maldives. The total had been $235,000. The marriage had lasted 3 years. The honeymoon photographs were still somewhere in my storage unit in a box I hadn't opened since. The divorce had cost me, too. Vivian's lawyer, her temporary accommodation during the separation, the mediator, I had covered all of it, believing I was helping her get back on her feet. Another $62,000. Then there had been the years between marriages. Vivian had decided, during that interval, that she wanted to study interior design. She had been passionate about it, genuinely passionate, and I had been glad to see it, glad that she had found something to pour herself into. The program was a 2-year course at a prestigious design institute, and the tuition, materials, and study travel had totaled $97,000. She had completed the course, received her certificate, and worked in the field for approximately 14 months before deciding the clients were insufferable and the industry was not what she had imagined. She had never returned to it. The certificate was presumably in a drawer somewhere in the 4-story house, between the wine cellar and the heated pool. The apartment I co-leased with her when she said she couldn't afford a security deposit alone after her divorce from Graham, 18 months of subsidized rent that came to $41,000. The car I bought because the one she had broke down and she needed reliable transport for Cora, who had just been born, $28,000. The hospital bills during Cora's first difficult year of life, a respiratory condition that required specialist treatment not covered by Vivian's basic health plan. The one I had already been supplementing, that came to $33,000. I had not counted that money, then or now, among the grievances. A child's health is not a line in a ledger. That money had been given in love and remained in love regardless of how everything else turned out. I also remembered the year Vivian was 32 and decided she needed to leave the country for 6 months. She had framed it as a period of self-discovery, which I had understood, because I had always believed in her right to grow. She had gone to Southeast Asia with a friend and had traveled through 4 countries, staying in good hotels because she could not sleep in hostels, eating well because she had a sensitive stomach, attending retreats and workshops because she was, she said, working on herself. I had funded every month of it. $18,000 in transfers, sent without complaint, because I was the kind of mother who believed that her daughter's growth was worth every penny. When Vivian came home, tanned and rested and full of stories, she had given me a small wooden elephant she had bought at a market somewhere. I had kept it on my windowsill for years. It was still there on the windowsill the morning I left, and I had looked at it for a long time before deciding not to pack it. I remembered, too, the year Vivian was 36, when she had called me from a hotel room at 11 o'clock at night saying she and Graham were separating and she did not know what to do. I had talked with her for 4 hours. I had not been sleeping well that year, the early stages of a blood pressure condition my doctor had been monitoring, and the 4 hours on the phone had exhausted me completely. But I had done it without hesitation, because that was who I was, and because she needed me, and because there had been a moment at about the 2-hour mark when she had said, quietly, in the voice of the small girl she had once been, "I don't know what I would do without you, Mom." And that had felt like enough. That had felt like the whole thing was worth it. I sat at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, surrounded by receipts and transfer slips and co-signed contracts, and I remembered every one of those moments. Every moment when the giving had been met with something warm enough to make me believe the ledger balanced. And I understood, finally, that I had spent 22 years mistaking those moments, those rare, fleeting flashes of real connection, for the whole story. I had lived on them the way a person lives on bread and water when they have convinced themselves it is a feast. Then came Marcus. Then came the house. The house had been Marcus's idea, presented to Vivian as a vision for their future and to me as a responsible investment in a rising market. I had provided the down payment, $1,200,000, from the sale of the family home combined with a reverse mortgage on a secondary property I had inherited from Raymond's family. I had also, at their request, co-signed the primary mortgage, because Marcus's credit history was, in his own words, complicated from a previous failed venture. I had not thought of that signature as a risk at the time. I had thought of it as a mother's reasonable, ordinary support. And then there was Marcus's business. The first one I had helped finance was a tech consultancy that never consulted anything as far as I could determine. $70,000, given over 2 transfers across a period of 6 months, each time accompanied by new projections and new timelines and the same forward-leaning confidence. The second was a hospitality venture, a boutique hotel concept that required significant upfront investment before any returns could materialize. Marcus had explained this to me in detail over a very long dinner, with charts and projected figures and the kind of assured, polished energy that makes people feel they are being included in something important. I had contributed $95,000 to that venture. The hotel had never materialized. The money had never returned. Marcus had attributed this to planning permission delays and a hostile local council, and I had accepted the explanation because I did not know what else to do with it. Most recently, 3 months before Vivian's birthday, Marcus had called me about an urgent cash flow problem in what he described as his most promising enterprise yet, an import distribution network that needed bridge financing to complete a major order. He had seemed genuinely distressed. He had used the word desperate at least 4 times in a single phone call. I had transferred $55,000 within 48 hours because that was who I was. The kind of person who did not let family go desperate. I sat at my table past midnight, adding the numbers in the margins of a yellow notepad. When I reached the final sum, I set the pen down and looked at what I had written. $3,419,000. Over 22 years. Given freely, recorded carefully, never once used as leverage, never once weaponized, never once thrown in her face during any argument. Money I had earned over a lifetime of 33 years as a bookkeeper, money I had inherited, money I had saved from a pension that was never large, money I had borrowed against properties and repaid myself, slowly, steadily, with the discipline of a woman who had always taken financial responsibility seriously. $3,419,000. And she wanted me gone. Something crystallized in me then. Not cruelty. Not revenge, exactly. Clarity. The peculiar, piercing clarity that only arrives when you have finally seen the full picture of something you have been too close to understand. I had spent 22 years financing a life I was not invited to participate in equally. I had paid for the house but was not welcome to sit in it without feeling like an interruption. I had funded the ventures but was never consulted on decisions. I had raised my granddaughter during school holidays and school illnesses and the weekends when Vivian and Marcus wanted to travel, and I had done it gratefully, joyfully, because Cora was a child I loved without condition. But love without condition is not the same as love without limit. I went to bed at 2 in the morning. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark and I thought about Raymond, who had died of a sudden heart attack 17 years ago, who had been a quiet, sturdy man with a talent for patience and a deep, uncomplicated love for both of us. I thought about what he would say if he could see the tableau of that kitchen. If he could see his daughter's face, cold as stone, telling his wife that the best gift she could receive was to cease to exist. I thought Raymond would be very sad. And then I thought he would take my hand and say, in the voice he used when he was being completely serious, "Maggie, it is time to take care of yourself now." By morning, I had made a decision. Not an impulsive decision. Not a scorched earth, grief-fueled explosion. A considered, methodical, fully formed decision. The kind that a woman who has spent 33 years keeping other people's financial records knows how to make. I was going to disappear. Exactly as Vivian had asked. But I was going to do it on my terms. The first call I made that Sunday morning was to my oldest friend, a woman named Patricia Dunmore, who had known me since we were both 24 and newly employed at the same company. Patricia was 70 years old, sharp as a blade, and had been watching my relationship with Vivian for 2 decades with a mixture of deep concern and careful silence. She was not the kind of friend who told you what to do. She was the kind who waited, patiently, until you were ready to hear it yourself. She had tried, once, about 8 years ago, to gently suggest that my financial arrangements with Vivian seemed one-directional. I had been defensive. I had said that she didn't understand the full picture. Patricia had nodded and said nothing further, and she had waited 8 more years for me to arrive at the same conclusion on my own. Patricia came over within the hour. She brought a thermos of coffee and a box of almond biscuits, and she sat across from me at my little table, and she listened to everything I said without interrupting once. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I've been waiting for this conversation for 8 years, Maggie. What do you need?" I explained the plan. Patricia would be my accomplice and my alibi. She would wait 3 days and then go to Vivian with a message that she had come to check on me, found the apartment locked and quiet, and upon using the spare key I had given her, discovered it empty except for a sealed letter and a set of legal documents. "It's not a lie," I told her. "By the time you go to her, it will be the truth." Patricia nodded slowly. A small, fierce smile moved across her face. "Where are you going?" "Portugal," I said. "Lisbon. I've been reading about it for 2 years. I have a folder of brochures." "Of course you do," Patricia said, and I heard the warmth in her voice, the particular warmth that comes from being truly known by someone. That Sunday, after Patricia left, I began making my arrangements with the calm focus of a woman who has spent her life solving other people's problems and has finally, mercifully, turned that capability toward herself. My first stop Monday morning was the bank. Specifically, I went to see the accounts manager, a patient man named Mr. Donovan who had handled my finances for 11 years and who greeted me with a handshake and genuine concern when I told him what I needed. There was a joint account Vivian and I had maintained for years. An emergency fund, I had called it, into which I made regular deposits for Cora's education, for unforeseen crises, for whatever might come. The balance at that moment was $162,000. I would like to dissolve the joint account and transfer the full balance to my individual account, I told Mr. Donovan. He confirmed the balance twice, as he was obligated to do, and then he processed the transfer without further question. I signed each form with the steady hand of a woman who had spent decades signing other people's important documents and was now, finally, signing her own. From the bank, I went directly to the office of my solicitor, a woman named Anita Chowdhury who had handled Raymond's estate and whom I trusted completely. I had called ahead. Anita was expecting me. "I need to make several changes today," I told her, sitting in her clean, orderly office with its stacks of files and its framed law degree on the wall. "To my will, to my co-signer status on the mortgage, and to certain financial instruments that currently name my daughter as beneficiary." Anita listened without surprise. She was a solicitor. She had seen every variety of human complication. She asked me clarifying questions in a quiet, professional tone, and then she began drawing up the necessary paperwork. I removed Vivian as the sole beneficiary of my estate. I created a trust in Cora's name, managed by Anita's office, that would become accessible when Cora turned 25. I contacted the mortgage servicer to formally notify them, as co-signer, that I believed there was a material risk of default given the missed payment from the previous month, a missed payment Vivian had casually mentioned to me in early March, not as a warning but as a justification for why she needed me to cover a utility bill. As co-signer, Anita confirmed, "You have standing to initiate a review." Given the documented missed payment and Marcus Holloway's known financial instability, the servicer will likely require them to demonstrate sufficient means to continue independently. "That's exactly what I want them to review," I said. I also canceled the supplemental health policy I had been paying for on Vivian's behalf, $940 a month, for 6 years. And I formally withdrew from the insurance guarantee I had provided on Marcus's most recent venture, which had been another condition he had buried in a document I had signed during what I now understood was a deliberately rushed and deliberately complicated meeting over dinner, when Marcus had kept refilling my glass of wine and talking very fast about market windows and investor timelines. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, I had done more for myself in one day than I had done in the previous 22 years. I walked out of Anita's office into the cool spring air feeling something I could not immediately name. It took me most of the walk home to identify it. The feeling was this: I was a full person. Not a function. Not a resource. A full, living, choosing person. And I was choosing. That evening I booked my flight to Lisbon. One way, with an option to extend the return date indefinitely. I packed 2 suitcases, my good clothes, my books, my journals, Raymond's photograph, my mother's sapphire bracelet, which was coming with me after all, though it would not be going to Vivian. Tuesday, my phone rang 9 times. 6 of the calls were from Vivian, 2 from Marcus, 1 from an unknown number. I did not answer any of them. On Wednesday morning, I wrote the letter. It took me 4 hours. I wrote it by hand first, then typed it carefully, then printed it on the good paper I kept for correspondence. 12 pages. Every page a different chapter of the same story, the story of a woman who had given everything and been told that her greatest gift would be her absence. I was not cruel in that letter. I was precise. I listed every amount, every date, every sacrifice, with the accuracy of a professional bookkeeper who has kept meticulous records her entire life. I listed what had changed, legally and financially. I listed what Vivian could now expect in terms of the mortgage review, the insurance cancellation, the closed joint account, the amended will. I listed all of it without anger, without dramatic language, without anything except the quiet, irrefutable authority of a woman who has finally decided to tell the truth. I wrote about the boutique that closed. About the interior design certificate that was used for 14 months and then abandoned. About the wedding I paid for in full, every flower and every imported bottle of champagne, for a marriage that lasted 3 years and dissolved into a divorce I also funded. I wrote about the exchange year in Southeast Asia and the $18,000 in transfers I sent without hesitation, month after month, because I believed in her growth. I wrote about the hospital nights I had spent alone because Vivian was busy, and about the birthdays I had marked quietly in my apartment because she had forgotten, and about the Christmas gift card from the garden center that told me, more clearly than any single word she had ever said, exactly where I ranked in her awareness of the world. None of this was written as an indictment. It was written as testimony. There is a difference. An indictment demands a verdict. Testimony simply states what occurred and lets it stand. I was stating what had occurred. I was letting it stand. I was, for the first and only time in our relationship, refusing to help her look away from it, when Vivian had forgotten to buy me a gift and compensated by handing me an envelope containing a gift card to a garden center near my apartment, a place I had never visited and had no interest in, which told me the gift card had been purchased in 5 minutes at a petrol station on the drive over. I had said it was lovely. I had meant to. That was the kind of mother I was. I wrote about my 68th birthday, when I had waited all day for a call from Vivian and none had come. When I finally called her at 6:30 in the evening, she had said, "Oh, Mom, of course, happy birthday. We were going to take you to dinner but Cora has a thing. Can we do it next weekend?" The dinner next weekend never happened. I stopped waiting for it after 3 weeks. I wrote about the 2 times I had been admitted to hospital, once for a blood pressure crisis, once for a collapsed vein that required monitoring, and how, on both occasions, Patricia had been the one who sat with me in the waiting room while Vivian was otherwise occupied. I did not write those things bitterly. I wrote them because they were the truth, and because the letter was the first honest account of our relationship that either of us would ever read. You asked me to disappear from your life, I concluded. I have granted your wish with more thoroughness than you anticipated. I hope that the life you live without me is exactly as free and uncomplicated as you imagined it would be. I suspect it will be somewhat more expensive. I sealed the envelope. I gave it, along with the key to my apartment, to Patricia. And on Thursday morning, at 6 o'clock, I took a taxi to the airport. The flight to Lisbon was 3 hours and 40 minutes. I sat by the window. I watched the land below give way to water, watched the pale morning sky shift into something warmer over the Atlantic, and I want to be very precise about this, because I think precision matters when you are describing something as rare as what I felt in that moment. I felt the specific relief of a woman who has stopped pretending. Not relief from pain. The pain was still there, and it would be there for a long time. But the particular exhaustion of spending every day of your life being available for someone who was never available for you, that lifted. It lifted like fog burns off in the morning, slowly and then all at once. Before we find out what happened next in the story, I want to take a brief moment to speak directly to anyone watching who might be going through their own sudden, overwhelming transition. If you are navigating a bitter divorce, the loss of a spouse, or a financial shock, you know the hardest part isn't just the money, it's not knowing what to do first. That is exactly why we created the Phoenix Blueprint. It is a practical, step-by-step guide for starting over. It doesn't have fluffy affirmations or vision boards. It is a tactical survival manual. It gives you the exact checklist for the first 48 hours, including the one rule you must follow: do not make any decision you cannot reverse. It includes the Found Money worksheet, showing you exactly how to check state databases, because 1 in 7 Americans actually has unclaimed money waiting for them right now. It even gives you word-for-word boundary scripts to use when family members pressure you for money or try to make decisions for you. You can get the entire guide right now for just $17. If you're watching on your TV, just pull out your phone, open your camera, and scan the QR code on the screen right now. If you're on a computer or phone, click the top link in the description. You don't have to figure this out alone. Now, let's get back to the story. The travel agency's representative met me at the arrivals hall of Lisbon Airport with a sign bearing my name. She was a young woman named Sophia, who had a warm, efficient manner and spoke 4 languages. She drove me to the apartment that had been arranged for my first month, a light-filled flat in the Alfama district, 2nd floor, with azulejo-tiled walls in the entrance and tall windows that looked out over the terracotta rooftops toward the river. "This is yours for the month while you decide," Sophia said, handing me the keys. "I have left a folder with everything you need: restaurants, transport, the names of English-speaking doctors in the area, cultural events, and the contact for a financial advisor who specializes in helping retirees relocate to Portugal." I stood in the middle of that small, beautiful apartment and I breathed. That first afternoon, I did something I had not done in more years than I could count. Nothing. I made a cup of tea from the box that had been left in the kitchen. I sat in the armchair by the window. I watched the light change over the rooftops. A cat walked across a nearby ledge. Somewhere below, someone was playing guitar. I sat there for 2 hours and I did not solve a single problem for anyone. I did not answer a single request. I did not calculate what anyone else needed or how I might provide it. I sat and I watched the light, and for the first time in decades the silence around me was not the silence of waiting. It was the silence of arrival. That evening, Patricia called from back home. It was the signal we had arranged. She had gone to Vivian's house. "I delivered the letter," she said. "And the documents. I did what we planned, told her I'd been trying to reach you for 2 days, that I used the spare key and found the apartment empty." There was a pause. Maggie, she went completely white. She read the first page and then sat down on the floor. I've never seen that before. Not from her. "How did she react?" I asked. "She cried. For quite a while. And then she started making calls. To Marcus. To the bank, I think. And then she called me back and demanded I tell her where you were. I told her I genuinely did not know, which, of course, is true, because you never told me the specific address." "Good. She's frightened, Maggie. Not just about the money. I think, and I may be wrong, I think she is actually frightened about you." "She'll adjust," I said. And then I added, more quietly, "She always does." That night I lay in the narrow bed of the Alfama apartment, listening to the city settle into its nighttime sounds, the distant tram, the voices below on the cobblestones, the occasional burst of fathu from somewhere along the hill, and I thought about Cora. My granddaughter. 7 years old, with Raymond's eyes and an extremely serious interest in insects and a habit of carrying a notebook everywhere she went. Cora, who had not run to greet me at the door on Saturday. Cora was the one person in that house I genuinely ached for. Not Vivian. Not even in the grief of everything. But Cora was a child, and children do not choose their circumstances, and the fact that she was in that house learning, without anyone meaning to teach it, that grandmothers are taken for granted, that was the thing that pressed against my chest in the dark. I told myself, you cannot save a child by destroying yourself. You can only save a child by being whole. And then I slept. On the Friday of that first week, my phone began its symphony of desperation. By midday I had 37 missed calls. 14 from Vivian, 9 from Marcus, and the rest from numbers I did not recognize, friends and relatives who had been recruited, apparently, to help locate me. There were 41 text messages. I read them all in the order they had arrived. The first messages were tearful and confused. Mom, where are you? Patricia says you're gone. Please call me back. I'm scared. Then, as the hours passed and the financial implications of the letter began to register, the messages shifted. The bank called. They said there's been a request to review the mortgage. You need to call them and explain this was a misunderstanding. And then, Marcus says you canceled the insurance guarantee on his business account. That's going to cause serious problems for his cash flow, Mom. Can you please just call? And then, 3 days in, a message that I read twice, this is insane behavior, Mom. Whatever I said, you don't just disappear on your family. Cora is asking for you every day. Is that what you want? To hurt a 7-year-old? I sat with that last message for a long time. I thought about the last 12 times Cora had needed something. The school project I had stayed up past midnight helping with while Vivian and Marcus attended a charity gala. The fever that had spiked to 103 on a Tuesday when Vivian had a spa booking and Marcus was in meetings, and I had sat all night in a hospital waiting room with a small, frightened child who kept asking when her mummy was coming. The holidays, the weekends, the ordinary school pickups when neither of them had the time or inclination and I had rearranged whatever I was doing, my doctor's appointments, my quiet mornings, the rare occasions I made plans of my own, to be available. I had not disappeared from Cora. Cora had been present in my life every single day that her mother had allowed it. I was not the one who had made our relationship conditional. I sent one reply, to Vivian only. I am safe and well. Cora is loved and will always be loved. What you are experiencing is not a misunderstanding. It is a consequence. Take care of your family, Vivian. That is now your responsibility, as it should always have been. I did not reply to anything else. I turned the phone to silent and went for a walk. I walked for 2 hours through Alfama, up the steep cobbled streets, past the bright laundry hung between windows, past the walls covered in blue and white tiles depicting scenes from centuries ago. I walked until I reached the Miradoro de Graca, a viewpoint at the top of the hill that looks out over the whole city, over the river, over the bridge that hangs orange-red against the sky. I sat on a bench and I looked at all of it and I thought, I have never been here before. I have never stood in this place. This is a place that belongs to no version of my life that existed before this week. This is purely new. That afternoon I met my financial advisor, a calm, careful man named Dr. Ferreira, who had helped numerous foreign retirees navigate Portuguese residency and investment. He explained the non-habitual resident tax regime, which offered significant advantages to retirees relocating to Portugal. He explained the process for obtaining residency. He reviewed my financial picture without judgment and with considerable professionalism, and at the end of our meeting he said, in a tone of quiet respect, Mrs. Calloway, your financial discipline over your lifetime is remarkable. You have more options than many people half your age. I know, I said. And for the first time in memory, I said it without immediately thinking about how those options could be used to help someone else. The following week I joined a walking group for English-speaking expats, organized by a non-profit that supported older adults transitioning to life in Portugal. There were 14 of us that first Tuesday morning, gathered at the foot of the Estrela Basilica, ranging in age from 63 to 81. Most were British or American. A few were Irish. One woman, a 75-year-old named Constance from Bristol, introduced herself by saying she had moved to Lisbon after her son and daughter-in-law had spent 4 years borrowing from her until nothing was left to borrow and they had grown cold in proportion to her diminishing usefulness. I introduced myself by saying I was 72, newly arrived, and learning to live without an audience. Constance laughed. It was a deep, real laugh, the kind that only comes from people who have earned it. "You'll fit right in here," she said. Over the following weeks, Constance became something I had not had enough of in recent years, a friend who understood. Not because our stories were identical, but because we recognized in each other the same long sequence of choices made from love that had calcified, over time, into something that looked more like captivity. We walked together every Tuesday and Friday. We found a small cafe on the Rua do Século that made the best pastiest nata either of us had ever tasted, and we sat there most Thursday mornings and talked about our lives with the frank, exhausted relief of people who have finally stopped pretending. We walked through parks and along the waterfront and up the 7 hills that give Lisbon its particular, breathless character. We walked past ancient churches and modernist bookshops and tiny grocery stores where old men sat in folding chairs outside and watched the street with the comfortable authority of people who have been watching the same street for 60 years. Constance had a gift for noticing things, the color of a doorway, the particular lean of a palm tree in a courtyard, the way the light on the river was never exactly the same twice. She pointed things out as we walked, and I found myself seeing the city through her attention, which was different from seeing it through my own. I was grateful for that. For most of my life I had seen everything through the lens of what it meant to Vivian. It was a slow and necessary education, learning to see for myself again. One Thursday morning, about 6 weeks after we met, Constance told me something I have thought about many times since. She said that when she first tried to draw a boundary with her son, when she first said, quietly and without drama, that she could not give him money that month because she needed it for her own medical expenses, he had accused her of being selfish. He had used that exact word. Selfish. And she had believed him, for a time. She had lain awake at night asking herself whether she was selfish, whether a good mother would find a way, whether her own medical needs were really as urgent as she was making them out to be. The cruelest trick, she told me, setting down her coffee cup, is that they make you doubt your own reality. They have taken so much for so long that the moment you hold anything back, they call it theft. And the worst part is, after enough years of it, some part of you believes them. I had believed something similar. I had spent 41 years arranging my life around Vivian's needs so thoroughly that when those needs became demands and those demands became contempt, I had still found ways to tell myself it was love. That she was stressed. That she didn't mean it. That good mothers absorb these things. The hardest part, Constance continued, was believing I wasn't a bad mother for choosing myself. The guilt is extraordinary. No one warns you about the guilt. The guilt is the mechanism, I told her. It's how it's maintained. If a child, and I mean an adult child, I mean a 40-year-old person who knows exactly what they're doing, if they can make you feel guilty for having needs, then they never have to acknowledge that your needs are real. Constance was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You should write that down." I had already started writing. In my 5th week in Lisbon, my phone rang with a number I recognized immediately. It was Marcus. I answered. I am not entirely sure why. Curiosity, perhaps. Or a pragmatic desire to understand what had developed at home. Margaret. His voice was stripped of its usual confidence. What was underneath it was not appealing, a man who had never had to genuinely reckon with anything, suddenly reckoning. The bank is moving forward with the mortgage review. They've asked us to provide proof of sufficient income to continue independently. We're having trouble demonstrating that right now, because of the cash flow situation with the business. I see, I said. Is there any way we can discuss this? I know Vivian said terrible things. I know you have every right to be angry. But the house, Margaret. Cora grew up in that house. We would lose everything. I thought about the first time Marcus had sat across from me at a restaurant, charming and plausible, and told me about his vision for their life together. I thought about how thoroughly and consistently that vision had required my money and never once required his discipline. I thought about the $55,000 from 3 months ago, transferred within 48 hours because he had used the word desperate. Marcus, I said. I spent 22 years being the solution to problems I did not create. I'm not going to do it anymore. I suggest you find a way to demonstrate financial viability on your own merits, which is what the bank requires of every other mortgage holder in the country. But Margaret, I also want you to understand something clearly, I said, and I kept my voice completely even, because I had been a bookkeeper and bookkeepers do not raise their voices when they are reading figures from a ledger. I do not regret a single action I have taken since leaving. I regret only that it took me this long. Goodbye, Marcus. I hung up. My hand was perfectly steady. In my 6th week in Lisbon, something happened that I had not anticipated. Constance had introduced me to a small online community, a private group of older women who had made radical life changes after reaching points of crisis in their family relationships. I had been reading the posts in the group for several weeks, occasionally commenting, mostly listening. One afternoon I shared my story in full, not for sympathy, but because the moderator of the group had asked if anyone had a story they were willing to tell in their own words, for a series of posts about late life reinvention. The response was something I was entirely unprepared for. Over 400 comments in the first 24 hours. Women from dozens of countries, writing things like, I thought I was the only one. And my son hasn't said thank you in 11 years. Not once. And you have just described my life so precisely that I had to check if you knew me. And one that stayed with me for days afterward, from a woman who signed herself only as R, 66 years old, from a city I had never visited. I read your words and I felt, for the first time in 30 years, that the way I had been treated is not something I invented or deserved. Thank you for that. It is a gift I did not know I needed. The moderator, a woman named Harriet based in New Zealand, reached out privately. Would you be willing to speak on a podcast? Your story is reaching people who genuinely need it. I said yes. The podcast episode was recorded over a video call, with Harriet asking questions and me answering them in the same careful, precise way I approached everything, methodically, with full honesty and no self-pity. It was published 3 weeks later and received more downloads than any episode the podcast had produced in 2 years of operation. Harriet wrote to tell me this with visible excitement. I received the news with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who has spent a lifetime doing good work and is only now, finally, doing it entirely for herself. I began receiving emails from women all over the world. From India, from Brazil, from Nigeria, from South Korea, from Canada, from the Philippines. The particulars of their stories differed in every possible cultural and economic detail, but the emotional architecture was identical. A lifetime of giving. An expectation that had calcified into an entitlement. A moment when the giving was not enough, and the person who gave was told, in one way or another, that they were the problem. I answered every email. Not quickly, I was living my life, not managing correspondence, but eventually, every one. I found that the act of answering, of being genuinely useful in a way that cost nothing but attention and honesty, gave me something I had not expected to need, purpose that was entirely my own. Back home, in the meantime, the situation was progressing exactly as the legal and financial logic dictated it would. Patricia called every 2 weeks. She told me that the bank had officially initiated a default review and that Vivian and Marcus had been unable to provide satisfactory proof of independent financial means. Vivian had returned to work. She had worked in marketing before Cora was born and had, in the intervening years, maintained a loose professional presence that she now had to convert rapidly into something full-time. Marcus had eventually secured a position with a property management firm, earning considerably less than his ventures had ever promised but considerably more reliably. It was, Patricia observed with dry precision, the first actual salary he's received in 4 years of marriage. Vivian had come to Patricia's house twice. Once in the second week, when she was still oscillating between grief and anger, still insisting that I had overreacted, that I had manufactured a crisis from a moment of frustration. Patricia had told her, gently but without yielding, that what she had said to me in that kitchen was not a moment of frustration but a declaration, and that I had simply chosen to believe her. Vivian had left that visit angry, Patricia said. She had stood on the doorstep on her way out and said, "She's always been dramatic. She'll come home when she's had enough of playing the martyr." Patricia had said nothing to that. She had simply let it stand in the air between them, and Vivian had eventually walked away from it, and the silence it left behind had apparently been instructive. The second time Vivian came, it was different. Patricia described it as quieter. Vivian had not railed or demanded. She had sat in Patricia's living room and cried without argument. She had said, and Patricia told me this verbatim, knowing I would want the exact words, "I think I always believed she would just keep coming back. No matter what. I never thought there was a limit because she never showed me there was one." Patricia had replied, "Every person has a limit, Vivian. Your mother just took longer to find hers than most." Vivian had not contacted me directly in 11 weeks. She had tried, in the early weeks, but my number had been blocked. She had sent a message through Patricia, which Patricia had relayed to me. The message read, "Tell her I understand why she left. Tell her I don't blame her. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her that whatever she decides, I hope she is all right." I received that message on a Thursday morning in the cafe on the Rua do Seculo, over pastéis de nata and strong coffee. I read it and sat with it for a long time. "What do you feel?" Constance asked. "Something," I said. "I'm not sure it's forgiveness. Not yet. But something adjacent to it. Something like recognition. That she has finally seen what was there all along. Is that enough?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "I think it might be more than I expected." At 14 weeks, I received a phone call from a number I did not recognize. I answered because I had made a practice, since moving to Lisbon, of answering unknown calls. The voice on the other end was young and female and slightly uncertain. "Grandma Margaret?" My heart stopped. Then started again, differently. "Cora," I said. "My darling." She was calling from a friend's phone because, she explained very seriously, she had asked her daddy if she could call me and he had found a way to make it possible. Her voice had grown in the months since I had last heard it, or perhaps it only seemed that way because every ordinary thing about Cora now seemed precious in a way it had not been when I took it for granted. "We moved," she said. "We're in a smaller house now. It doesn't have a pool. But I have my own room and there's a magnolia tree outside the window and Mummy says maybe we can get a rabbit." "That sounds lovely," I said, and I meant it. "Daddy told me some things," she said, carefully, with the precision of a child who has been rehearsing. "He said you had to go away because some things that happened were very unfair to you. He said you are okay and you are living in a beautiful city by the sea." "Is that true?" "That is completely true," I said. "Are you happy?" she asked. Direct, as she had always been. Raymond's eyes and Raymond's directness, both. "Yes, Cora. I am." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mummy cries sometimes at night. Not when she thinks I can hear. But I can hear." I closed my eyes. "Your mummy loves you very much," I said. "And she is going through something difficult. That's okay. Difficult things make us learn. Daddy said that too." Another pause. "Grandma Margaret, will you come back?" I took a breath. "Not to live there, no. But I am not gone from your life. You can call me whenever your daddy says it's all right. And when you are old enough to visit on your own, you can come and see me in Lisbon." We can walk along the river and eat custard tarts, and you can bring that notebook of yours and draw everything you see. I would like that, Cora said, and I could hear the smile in it. We talked for 40 minutes. She told me about her new school, about the magnolia tree, about a beetle she had found in the garden and named Archimedes. I told her about the alfama cats, about the river at sunset, about the fado music that drifted up from the restaurants at night. When we said goodbye, she said, "I love you, Grandma Margaret." And I said, "I love you too, my darling girl. More than you will ever need measuring." After I hung up, I sat for a long time looking out the window at the river. It was evening. The sky over the water was doing something extraordinary with its colors. I thought about all the evenings I had spent in my small apartment back home waiting for a call from Vivian that rarely came unless she needed something. I thought about the quality of that waiting, the particular low-grade tension of a person who exists primarily in the hope that they will be needed. I did not feel that anymore. That week I signed the papers for permanent residency. Dr. Ferreira had walked me through every step. I also made a decision about the property in which I had a co-signer's interest. Anita back home had been in contact with the mortgage servicer throughout the preceding months, and the timeline of events had unfolded as follows. The bank had formally notified Vivian and Marcus that the review process had been completed, that their independent financial means were insufficient to satisfy the lender's requirements without the co-signer's guarantee, and that the co-signer, me, had formally withdrawn that guarantee. The bank had offered Vivian and Marcus a 6-month window to either refinance independently or arrange alternative arrangements. They had not been able to refinance. The house had been listed for sale under the bank's authority at month 5, and it had sold within 3 weeks at a price that satisfied the outstanding mortgage with a surplus. As co-signer with a documented initial contribution toward the down payment, I was entitled under the terms of the original contract to a recovery of that contribution, as agreed. The total return to me was $1,340,000, which included the original down payment sum plus accrued interest and my documented share of the equity accumulated over the period of the mortgage. Additionally, the apartment I had let go of back home had been sold through an estate agent. After all fees and costs, the net proceeds were $680,000. In total, I had recovered nearly $2 million in assets that I had spent the better part of a decade believing were simply gone, dissolved into the endless maintenance of a life that did not include me. I sat with that number for a long time the afternoon Anita called with the final figures. I had always been good with numbers. I had spent 33 years making other people's numbers make sense. But this particular number was different, because it was not abstract. It was not a column in someone else's ledger. It was the material evidence of something I had believed was permanently and irrevocably lost, not just the money itself, but the version of me who had earned it over decades of careful, quiet, disciplined work. The money had not been wasted. It had been borrowed by someone who did not know that loans come due. And now it had come home, with interest, to the woman it had always belonged to. I did not celebrate extravagantly. I bought a proper apartment in Lisbon, a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building near the Príncipe Real garden, with tall ceilings and French doors opening onto a small balcony from which you could see the castle on the hill. I furnished it slowly and deliberately, choosing each thing for the way it made me feel rather than for its price or its practicality. I bought a writing desk. I bought a good lamp. I bought 2 armchairs for the sitting room, one of which I privately thought of as Cora's chair, for when she was old enough to come. I enrolled in a Portuguese language course, evening classes, twice a week, in a small school near the university. I discovered that languages at 72 are not impossible. They are merely different, you have to go at a different pace, and you cannot rely on the same kind of rapid memorization you might have had at 25. But you have something that compensates for what time has taken, patience. The deep, hard-won patience of a woman who has waited decades for things that never came, and has finally decided to redirect that patience toward things that will. I began writing a book. I had not planned to. It emerged, the way honest things often do, from the accumulation of what I had been saying privately, in the podcast, in the emails, in the conversations with Constance on Tuesday mornings and Thursday cafes. The book was not, primarily, a memoir, although it contained my story. It was, more precisely, a guide. A guide for women, and men, who found themselves in the position I had been in, giving beyond what was healthy or sustainable, waiting for a recognition that never came, and not knowing that they had the right to stop. Not knowing that stopping was not abandonment. Not knowing that preserving yourself was not the same as destroying someone else. I titled it, The Last Gift, Learning to Stop Giving Everything and Start Living Something. I wrote in the mornings, from 7 until 11, at the desk by the window. I walked in the afternoons. I spent evenings with Constance or with the other friends I had made in the expat walking group, or simply alone on my balcony with a glass of Portuguese wine and the comfortable, undramatic feeling of a life that fit. One evening, sitting on that balcony as the sun went down behind the castle, I made a list. Not a list of grievances, I was done with those, I had written them in the letter and left them there where they belonged. This was a different kind of list. A list of things I had rediscovered about myself since arriving in Lisbon. Things I had not known were missing because I had been too busy being available for someone else to notice their absence. I had rediscovered that I loved walking. Not purposeful walking, not walking to get somewhere or to collect someone, but the pure, absorbing pleasure of moving through a place with no agenda. I had rediscovered that I was funny, in a dry and quiet way that made people laugh unexpectedly. I had forgotten I was funny. There had not been much occasion for it. I rediscovered that I was curious, genuinely, hungrily curious about things, history, architecture, language, the way other people lived, the reason cities grow the way they grow. I had spent so many years directing every bit of curiosity toward Vivian's problems that I had nearly forgotten curiosity could be pointed outward, toward the world, for no reason other than the pleasure of understanding it. I rediscovered, perhaps most importantly, that I was good company. That people sought me out. That when I walked into a room, people were glad to see me. This seems like a small thing to say. But when you have spent decades in a relationship with someone who greets you with "Oh, it's you," you forget that there are people for whom your arrival is not a disappointment. You forget that your presence, simply as itself, not as a service, not as a check, not as a solution to a problem, can be something another person is glad of. I had forgotten. I was remembering. It was one of the slower recoveries, and one of the more important ones. I also rediscovered, that autumn, my relationship with silence. I do not mean the silence of an empty apartment where no one calls. I mean the productive, inhabited silence of a person who is thinking her own thoughts. A person whose inner life has not been colonized by the needs and dramas and emergencies of someone else. For 22 years, even my private moments had been occupied by Vivian. I would sit down to read and find myself wondering whether she had called the plumber about the kitchen tap. I would try to sleep and find myself running through her financial situation, calculating whether what I had given was enough, whether she was all right, whether I should offer more. My silence had not been mine. It had been borrowed time that was always about to be interrupted. In Lisbon, for the first time, the silence was simply mine. It was quiet because I was quiet. It had no agenda. It was not a waiting room. It was just the ordinary, beautiful absence of noise that belongs to a life that is finally its own. 4 months after the apartment sale was finalized, 7 months after I had arrived in Lisbon, I received an email from an address I had not blocked because I had not known to block it. It was from a new address Vivian had created, which she explained at the start of the email because she understood I might have blocked the others. The email was long. I read it 3 times. She wrote about the house, not with complaint, but with acknowledgement. She wrote that living in the smaller house had, initially, been humiliating, and that she had spent a long time being angry with me for what she had interpreted as retaliation. She wrote that the anger had eventually softened, not because anything got easier financially but because she had run out of things to blame other than herself. She wrote that Cora had told her about their phone call, and that hearing Cora describe the conversation, apparently in considerable detail over several days, had affected her in a way she had not expected. "You made time for her," Vivian wrote. "You have always made time for her. I used to think that was just what you did because you didn't have other things to fill your time with. I understand now that I had it backwards. You have more things to fill your time with than I can imagine, and you still made time. That's the difference between us. She wrote about Marcus, with a frankness that surprised me, that they had been to couples counseling, that it had been difficult and revelatory, that she had come to understand, in that process, that she had married 2 men in a row who reflected a pattern she had learned somewhere. A pattern of being with people who gave and people who took, and of taking as though it were a right, because she had grown up in a household where someone gave as though giving were an obligation. I know that's not an excuse, she wrote. I'm not telling you this to excuse anything. I'm telling you because I think you deserve to understand the architecture of how it happened. I saw your sacrifice as something permanent and unconditional, and so I treated it that way. I never questioned whether you were okay. I never asked if you were happy. I just assumed you were, because you never said you weren't, and because it was easier to assume. Near the end of the email she wrote, I know you may not ever want to talk to me again. I think I've finally accepted that that is within your rights, and that whatever you choose, you are not abandoning me. You are just finally, after 7 decades, choosing yourself. I wanted you to know that I see that. And that I'm glad, even though it hurts to say, that you chose it. I just wish you had felt free to do it without having to leave. She did not ask me to come back. That, more than anything, was what told me the email was real. I did not reply immediately. I sat with the email for 3 days, the way you sit with something that is not simple enough to answer quickly and not dismissible enough to ignore. On the 4th morning, I opened my laptop and wrote. Vivian, I began. I have read your email several times. I want you to know it landed. Properly, not politely. I was not a perfect mother. I have had time to think about this clearly now, and I believe my endless giving was, in part, a way of making myself necessary. Of ensuring that you could not leave me, could not dismiss me, could not grow past me, without losing something material. That is not noble. That is not pure sacrifice. That is its own kind of control, however unconsciously it was exercised. I did not give in order to trap you. But the effect, over time, was that we were both trapped, you in the debt of obligation, and me in the belief that I only had value as a provider. What you said to me in your kitchen on your birthday was the cruelest thing anyone has ever said to me. I want to be honest about that, because I think it deserves to be said plainly rather than softened into something we can both pretend was less than it was. You told your mother, on a birthday afternoon, that her greatest gift would be her death. I do not believe you meant it in the way it landed. But it landed. And the fact that you could say it tells me something about what the years had made of us. I am well. I am living in a beautiful city and I am writing a book and I have made friends who know me for who I am rather than for what I can provide. I am in better health than I was 2 years ago because I am under less stress, and I have come to understand that my body spent decades absorbing damage I attributed to aging when much of it was simply the cost of constant depletion. I cannot promise you a relationship as it was before. It was not a relationship before, it was a system, and the system had one engine and that engine was me. If there is ever to be something between us, it would have to be built from scratch, differently, with different terms. I do not know if that is possible. I do not know if I am ready to find out. But I am no longer close to the question. Take care of Cora. Let her bring her notebook. Let her be exactly who she is. She is the most interesting person in your family, and she will be extraordinary if you give her enough room. Your mother, Margaret. I sent it before I could reconsider. Her reply came 12 hours later. 1 line. Thank you for not giving up entirely. That's more than I deserved. I agreed with that assessment. But I was a woman who had always given more than the ledger suggested was warranted. It was, perhaps, an old habit I had not yet fully broken. And perhaps, I thought, perhaps that was not entirely the worst thing about me. In my 9th month in Lisbon, the book was finished. I sent it to an agent Harriet from the podcast had connected me with, a woman in her 50s named Clara who operated between London and New York. Clara responded within a week. This is remarkable, she wrote. Not because it is dramatic, though it is, but because it is clear. Most books on this subject are clouded by the author's grief. Yours is written from the other side of grief, and that makes it useful in a way that most are not. The book sold at auction to a publisher in London within 6 weeks. An advance that covered a comfortable year of living. Rights sold in multiple countries. An audiobook deal. I recorded the audiobook myself, in a studio in Lisbon, over 3 afternoons in late autumn. Sitting behind the microphone, reading aloud the account of my own life, I felt something I still find difficult to name. Something like completion. Like a door closing properly for the first time, not slamming, not locked, just closed. Gently. Firmly. On its own terms. The book was published the following spring. It was translated into 9 languages in its first year. The letters that came in afterward were, without question, the most meaningful correspondence of my life. More than the legal documents. More than the financial recoveries. The letters were evidence that the pain had served a purpose larger than the pain itself. A woman from Toronto wrote that she had read the book in one sitting in a hospital waiting room and had felt understood for the first time in 30 years. A man from Seoul wrote that he had given 3 copies to his sisters, all of whom had spent their lives funding their parents' expectations and had never had language for what that cost. A woman from Lagos wrote that she had translated key passages for her mother, who wept and said she had waited 78 years for someone to name what she had lived. The letter that moved me most arrived a year after the book's publication. It was from a young mother named Paula, 32 years old. Mrs. Calloway, she wrote, I have a 67-year-old mother who has sacrificed her entire life for me and my siblings. After reading your book, I realized we are treating her exactly as Vivian treated you. Your story opened my eyes. Yesterday, I called my mother and apologized for all the years of taking her for granted. I told her I want to help her achieve her own dreams instead of expecting her to always be available for mine. Thank you for helping me understand this before it was too late. That letter made me cry with joy. My pain had served to prevent other families from going through the same destruction. That is a rare and serious privilege. I did not take it lightly. Cora came to visit in summer, at the end of her school year. She was 8 years old by then, and she came with her father Marcus, who had written to ask my permission with a formality that was both touching and instructive, a man learning, late, what courtesy actually looks like. I said yes. Marcus stayed at a hotel. Cora stayed with me, in her room, the room with the second armchair, for 4 days. She brought her notebook. She drew everything she saw, the castle, the river, the alfama cats, the pasties de nata, the tile patterns on my staircase walls. She drew me, sitting at my writing desk, in a way that was completely accurate and somehow also very kind. In her drawing I looked like a woman who was at home. On her last evening, we sat on the balcony together after dinner. The sky was doing its colors over the water. Cora was quiet for a while, the comfortable quiet of a child who doesn't need to fill every silence, and then she said, Grandma Margaret, do you miss home? I thought about it properly before answering, because she deserved a proper answer. I miss some things, I said. I miss your grandfather's grave, where I used to go and talk to him on Sunday mornings. I miss Patricia. I miss the smell of the city in early October, when the leaves change. I don't miss feeling invisible. Cora processed this with a serious, careful expression that was entirely her own. Then she said, I think you're braver than anyone I know. You are 8 years old, I said. Your sample size is limited. She grinned. It was Raymond's grin. It undid me entirely, in the best possible way. I did not receive any further direct contact from Vivian for several months after that visit. Then, at the beginning of autumn, a package arrived in my Lisbon mailbox. No letter inside. No explanation. Just a photograph, printed on good paper, in a plain frame. It was a photograph I had not seen before, one of the few that existed of me holding Vivian as a newborn, taken by Raymond in the hospital the day she was born. I am looking down at her, and my face is doing something that I cannot quite describe. Not joy exactly. Something deeper. Something that is the specific emotion of a person looking at another person and understanding, fully and without reservation, that this is the most important thing that has ever happened to them. I looked at the photograph for a long time. Then I put it on the shelf above my writing desk, next to Raymond's photograph and my mother's sapphire bracelet and a drawing Cora had done of the two of us on the balcony, which she had left tucked under the pillow on her armchair. I never hung any of Vivian's photographs in my old apartment back home. I had not hung them, I think, because I had spent so many years trying to shrink myself in her presence that even in my own home I had become cautious about claiming space. I hung the hospital photograph that afternoon in Lisbon, because I am not shrinking anymore. I am a woman who has earned the space she takes up. Every square foot of it. I wrote back to Vivian. Not a long letter. Just 6 sentences. The photograph arrived. I have hung it above my desk. I look very young in it. So do you, though you do not look young the way most newborns do. You looked, even then, as though you had a strong opinion about something. There is always room for growth. In all of us. Cora says the magnolia tree outside her window has its first bloom this year. Pay attention to that with her. Those are the things that matter. Your mother. Today, I am sitting on my balcony in the late afternoon light, writing the last pages of this account. The city below me is doing what it always does at this hour, slowing, warming, filling with the sounds of people heading home or heading out, the language I am still learning floating up from the street in fragments I can mostly now assemble into meaning. The river is copper in this light. The bridge is red. A tram passes somewhere below with that particular sound that I have come to think of as the sound of my life now. Ordinary and good and entirely mine. I am 73 years old. I have a book that has been read in 9 languages. I have a granddaughter who fills notebooks and names beetles and has her grandfather's grin. I have a friend named Constance with whom I share pastillas de nata every Thursday morning and the truth on a regular basis, which is rarer and more valuable than the cakes. I have a writing desk and 2 armchairs and a view of a castle on a hill. I have a financial net worth that exceeds $4 million, not because I was greedy, but because the moment I stopped pouring everything outward, what remained began, quietly and steadily, to grow. And I have a life that belongs entirely to me, for the first time since I was 27 years old and became someone's mother. I also have a daughter. What she and I will become to each other from here is not yet written. I have accepted that uncertainty, which is itself a kind of progress. The woman who stood in Vivian's kitchen 6 months ago, holding a birthday cake in both hands and waiting for a smile, would not have recognized uncertainty as something she could survive. She would have rushed to resolve it, to soothe it, to make it safe for someone else at her own expense. She would have taken the uncertainty of another person's feelings as her own emergency. I no longer do that. My daughter asked me, as a birthday gift, to disappear from her life. I disappeared so completely, so thoroughly, so deliberately, that by the time she felt the absence I was already somewhere she could not follow without my permission. And from that distance, I could see us both clearly for the first time. What I saw of myself was this, a woman of uncommon discipline and uncommon love, who had made the mistake, for more years than she should have, of directing those qualities entirely outward. A woman who had believed that to love well meant to give everything. Who had not understood, until it was very nearly too late, that you cannot give everything and keep enough of yourself to be someone worth loving in return. What I saw of Vivian was this, a woman who had been given so much for so long that she had stopped being able to feel it. Who had learned, without anyone meaning to teach her, that love was something that arrived without conditions and therefore without meaning. That it could be pushed away and it would return. That it could be taken and it would be replenished. Who had, on an ordinary birthday afternoon, finally pushed hard enough to discover that she was wrong. That there are limits. That love does not have to absorb every cruelty. That a mother is also a person. She is learning. I believe that. I choose to believe it because the alternative, that people cannot change, cannot grow, cannot look at what they have lost and understand what it is asking of them, is not a belief I can afford to hold. I have too much life still to live to seal it off entirely from the possibility that the people I love might yet become who they are capable of being. But I am living that life here. In Lisbon. On this balcony. In this light. Not waiting. Not hoping in the passive, depleting way I used to hope. Living forward, with both hands free, with a cup of tea that is still warm because I poured it for myself and sat down to drink it immediately, without setting it aside to attend to something that could not wait, without letting it go cold the way I let so many things go cold over so many years. My daughter wanted me gone. I went. And I took, with me, the only thing that was always mine to take, myself. There is a version of this story that ends in bitterness. I have read enough letters from enough women to know that bitterness is the most natural destination for a journey like this one. You give and give and give, and when the giving is finally used against you, it is very easy, it is in fact the path of least emotional resistance, to turn the love inside out and wear it as armor. To decide that people cannot be trusted, that children are disappointments by nature, that the only safe thing is to close every door and live in the sealed room of your own self-sufficiency. I chose differently. Not because I am particularly saintly, I am a retired bookkeeper from a mid-sized shipping company who makes dry jokes and overcounts things and still occasionally wakes up at 4 in the morning doing arithmetic in her head. But because I understood, somewhere along the way, that bitterness would have required me to remain defined by Vivian's cruelty. And I had spent enough of my life being defined by Vivian. I was not going to spend the rest of it in that service either, even in the service of grievance. What I chose instead was something harder and, I think, more honest. I chose to hold two things at once, the full, undiminished truth of what was done to me, and the equally full truth that the person who did it was not the whole of my daughter, and I was not the whole of my love for her. Both things are real. Neither cancels the other. Living in that complexity, without resolving it prematurely into something tidier, is the actual work. It is unglamorous work. It does not make for a satisfying ending. But it is the only kind of ending that is actually true. If you found this story, if it reached you in whatever country, whatever language, whatever hour you needed it most, please remember this. The most radical act of love you will ever perform may be the act of refusing to be destroyed by the person you love most. That refusal is not abandonment. It is not cruelty. It is the acknowledgement that you are real, that your limits are real, that your life, every ordinary, precious minute of it, belongs to you and not to someone else's need. Take it back. However you can. Wherever that takes you. It is worth every difficult step to get there. Every bus ride with a cake box balanced in both hands. Every sleepless night with a yellow notepad and a pen running out of ink. Every form signed in a solicitor's office. Every suitcase packed in the dark before dawn. Every moment of sitting alone in a foreign city not knowing a single person and not having a single obligation and discovering, with a shock that slowly becomes gratitude, that this is not loneliness. This is freedom. They feel the same, at first. They are entirely different things. I am Margaret Calloway. I am 73 years old. I live in Lisbon in an apartment with tall ceilings and French doors and a view of a castle on a hill. I have a granddaughter named Cora who names beetles and draws everything she sees. I have a friend named Constance who tells me the truth on Thursday mornings. I have a book on a shelf in 9 languages. I have a desk where I write, every morning, in the good silence that belongs only to me. I have a daughter. We are, slowly and carefully and without certainty, finding out what that means now. And I have this, the knowledge that it is never too late to become the person you were always supposed to be. Not after 40. Not after 60. Not after 72 years of living for someone else. The door is always there. You simply have to decide, finally, to walk through it. Now, if this story moved you, click on the next video appearing on your screen. It carries another story of courage, of loss, and of the extraordinary life that waits on the other side of the hardest decision you will ever make. Stories like this remind us that starting over is terrifying, but it is always possible. If you or someone you love is facing a total reset right now, whether from a divorce, a loss, or a financial disaster, you need a plan. Scan the QR code on your screen or click the link below to get the Phoenix Blueprint for just $17. It gives you the exact steps you need to take in the first 48 hours, and a 90-day plan to get your independence back. Thank you for watching.